when we grew up, we did the things kind of normal kids did. We met with the neighbors. You know, this is actually a press conference. Read the paper on the front porch as well. This is a really cool picture because I'm literally reading an article in the Houston Post about me, Houston Chronicle, no, it's a Post, about me and playing football or something like that. Anyway, we took Dad's car out for a drive. This is actually flying the lunar module. And so my brother and I are trying to fly this thing. And then all of a sudden, everything just goes blank. And we looked up and he said, yeah, you guys just crashed into the moon. So, and then of course, there's take your son to work day. And so that's what we did. But mostly what I did is what normal kids do. I got in trouble. You can see my mom is really, really unhappy with me. So, I am deeply proud of my father for everything he did going to the moon. And to be honest with you, probably more so for the professional work, scientific work he did since then. But in Houston, where I lived, that stuff didn't matter because literally you couldn't swing a dead cat at my elementary school without hitting an astronaut's kid. So if you think about it, we lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. We had one of these pie-shaped lots, and 5 houses behind us, 3 of them were astronauts. And so they were kind of all over the place. It wasn't a big deal in my neighborhood that my dad was an astronaut. Wasn't even that big a deal that he got selected to go to the moon. I thought my dad was cool because he could pole vault. And so that the only guy that was cooler was Gordon Cooper because he had a race boat, and I thought that was way cooler than pole vaulting. So, you know, people ask me, what were you doing when your dad was on the moon? And the fact is I was shaking in my boots. So I'm an 11-year-old kid. And from the perspective of an 11-year-old kid, your dad has one job in life. I don't care whether he's an astronaut, a truck driver, football player, he has one job from an 11-year-old kid's perspective, and that is to embarrass you in front of your friends. And so when my dad's walking on the moon, there are, 160 million people watching, something like that. But the most important thing are my 25 classmates who are watching. And so there's this cord going from an instrument out to, to the lunar module, from an instrument to the lunar module. And my dad is hopping around on the moon. And I know he's hopping around on the moon because he told me that's really kind of hard to move around on the moon. You don't really walk, certainly don't run, you hop. And he was sort of trying to figure out what the best way to hop around on the moon is. So I'm convinced that my dad is going to trip over this cable and fall flat on his face in front of 160 million people, including my 25 classmates. So that's the basic story here. Is for me, it was normal growing up with astronauts, and one of the things that's happening with space is kind of the normalization of space. So over time, a lot of things changed, but probably I still always shared that skepticism for some of the stuff that my dad was talking about. You all know my dad, and he is brilliant and has expansive ideas, but sometimes they didn't make sense, and it's always been my job to tell him that. And maybe that's why my students call me the cosmic curmudgeon. But so I want to go from here to talk about the future. And I want to talk about the future of space, and it's not the future based on what we've been doing in the past. There are a lot of things that are different. And I think it really starts with the revolution in cost. And so cost of space missions has gone down by an order of magnitude. The amount of science and other things we can accomplish has probably gone up by an order of magnitude. So I just pulled a couple of numbers out. And so Surveyor, if you convert it to current year dollars, was $580 million without launch. Prime 1, which I think is going to go up this year, $70 million, including launch with a lot more capability. But here's where it gets really interesting. You can build satellites and fly them for under $50,000 with real capabilities, with cubesats. And so I mean, serious capabilities at $50,000. That is incredible. That changes a lot of things. But before I get into that part of it, I want to talk about things that are going on right now. So we are doing things that are different. When my dad went to the moon, we planted the flag, we stomped around and left some footprints. Mostly, we left the Soviet Union in the dust, and that was the most important thing. But we're doing something different this time. We're going to the moon to actually build an economy, build an in-space economy. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's going to work or not. And I mean, I spend my days thinking about commercial space and the future of space and teaching graduate students, and I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. But if it does, we're going to be using the moon as a base for an in-space economy. People will be working on the moon. Mostly, they're probably not going to be out there laying bricks and things like that, to be honest with you. They're probably mostly going to be sitting inside habitats, fixing robots and doing other things like that. But the point is, there will be permanently crewed and permanently inhabited, I'll say, habitats on the moon where people are doing real economic activity. I mean, the obvious thing that we're looking at is mining water on the moon and using that for rocket fuel, and that's going to take a long time to figure out whether there's we think we know there's water there. We're starting to figure out kind of what the water looks like. There's a lot of work to be done until you get to that first kilogram of rocket propellant. But if it works, and if you can get the price down to, let's call it $1,000 a kilogram-ish or something like that, that will revolutionize how we do a lot of things in space. Because think about it, when you launch off the moon, right, first of all, there's 1/6 gravity, so the gravity losses are great. But the other thing is you don't have an atmosphere. You don't have the tyranny, I call it, of the payload fairing, where you got to wrap everything inside a 5-meter fairing. I mean, it's great. It's great that New Glenn will have a 7-meter fairing, but this still doesn't fundamentally solve the problem. That's what will make a difference. We'll get resources off of the moon, build things in space, and that'll change everything that we do about space. The other thing we're doing is we're going to Mars. But we don't go to Mars until we get off of the moon. I mean, not just NASA, the European Space Agency, other international space agencies really can't afford to do more than one thing at a time. The only way we get to Mars and get off of the moon is by making the moon economically self-sustainable. But going to Mars is a massive undertaking, but it is really important because it really addresses some fundamental existential questions about humanity. Now, it may not be you need to have people on Mars to do all of these things, but if we find life on Mars, then even some signs of life on Mars, then I think you have to say it's pretty hard to imagine there isn't life throughout our galaxy, if not throughout the universe. If we don't find anything on Mars, then you wonder maybe it's not. The other fundamental question that we'll answer by going to Mars is, can humanity really live on another planet? I mean, going to the moon is great and it's tough enough, but you know, you're 3 days away from a can of beans. On Mars, you could be 2.5 years away from a can of beans. And so you really must be self-sufficient. And I think the things we'll learn by living on Mars will have a great deal of impact on Earth. So it's fundamentally important, I think, going to Mars. I think the scientific and the human justification is really clear.
Say, Andy?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I just insert a question into this
that
is related to exactly what you've just been saying? Some people are wondering, you know, why are we going back to the moon, and why don't we just concentrate? Because we've already been there, right? That's one of the conversations. Obviously, Artemis is all about returning to the moon and building a sustainable presence there. But do you have anything to say about that question that's often posed? You know, the moon is old news. Let's get on to
let's go to Mars.
Yeah, that's right. So
I think I kind of addressed that. We need to go to the moon because we need to figure out whether or not we can use the moon as the basis for an in-space economy. If we must launch everything that we need to do in space from the Earth I don't care if whether you got starships coming out your ears. It's going to be hard to do. If we can move to an in-space economy in which you get your resources off of the moon, send them back to low Earth orbit, high Earth orbit, whatever, I think that transforms how we do space, and that will enable a lot of the things that we sort of dream about. Let's say you can talk about space-based solar power in ways you never could consider. Whether that works or not is kind of another question. I think we go to the moon to determine whether there is a space-based economy. And so to me, that's the justification. And I sometimes you may not believe this, but sometimes I can kind of quibble with some of the messages in that sense, or what they're doing. And I think they could do a better job of articulating that fundamental point that the moon is about the economy. I mean, there's great science there, a lot of other great things. You will learn a lot about going to Mars, but fundamentally the moon is about developing the in-space economy. To me, Mars is a different story. As I said, there are two really key human questions that we can address by going there. I mean, is there life in the universe? And of course, you can do that robotically. But the question of whether humanity is capable of existing on another planet is something that's kind of unique to Mars. And so I think there are compelling reasons to go to Mars. There are, to me, equally, maybe more compelling reasons to go to the moon. Does that get at your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That really underlines what it's all about. I do notice we have a hand raised by Elizabeth. And
Elizabeth.
There you go.
Hi, Mr. Aldrin. Thanks for being here. I know that I don't know a lot about the moon, but I know that the water on the moon is not flowing like it does on Earth. And there's no ocean, there's no, rivers, etc.
Mhm.
But I know that there's a lot of things that we can get from the moon to bring back to Earth to help, so that we currently mine here on Earth, but maybe we could mine it on the moon and bring it back. Is that correct? Right? Is that
It's correct that people talk about that? I
Okay.
do not think that makes, I do not think it makes economic sense. I have a big
Okay.
concern about it.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. When you got big chunks of something on the moon, you want to bring
Yeah.
it back to Earth.
Yeah.
That looks a lot like a meteor to me. I mean, not only that, but it's, you would have to find something on the moon which is so unique that it
Yeah.
could absorb. I mean, right now it's sort of like $1 million a kilogram to go to the moon. And then that doesn't even include the trip back. I mean, obviously we'll get that cost down, but the point is, I think it's cost prohibitive to think about mining stuff in the moon, or for that matter, asteroids, and bringing it back to Earth. However, I think it's very plausible that you can get things off of the moon and bring them into Earth orbit and use them to construct things in space. And so that your mass is just coming off of the moon rather than coming off of the Earth. It's really hard to launch off the Earth. We learned that yesterday.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to launch off of the moon. And so I think that's kind of what's going on there.
So I have a subsequent question. I mean, this is tied to a book that I'm reading now. It has nothing to do with space. It's called The Water Defenders. And it's about El Salvador and how the people of El Salvador had to fight the mining companies because their water was being polluted by the way it was being mined. And so now there's no mining allowed in El Salvador at all. So when you're on the moon, you're going to need the water if you're going to be having a habitat there. So how can you make sure that you don't somehow, with whatever we're doing, whether we're terraforming or whatever we're doing there, that we're not also contaminating the water that whatever is there for the astronauts to use?
Well, I mean, so the first thing is there is no El Salvador or any other, frankly, meaningfully sized population. So I'm not worried about endangering people's lives on the moon. The people who live and work there will have all kinds of you'll use the water that you mine, and that will be very pure water, because just in the process of converting lunar ice into water, you're going to do all kinds of things that are going to probably purify it. So I'm not worried about the astronauts there, but you do raise an important point long term, which is humanity has been very good at doing many things. One of the things that we are very good at is polluting any environment that we go to.
Right.
And there are people who will go mercifully nameless for the moment, who've said, well, the moon is the place we should go and pollute the moon, because they send all your waste to the moon, because you don't worry about that. I think we need to be environmentally conscious about the moon. But I mean, I think that needs to be part of the development plan, but it's probably not at the top of the list of the most important things you have to do, but it's something we need to be thinking about from the beginning. Where it is important, where it is vitally important, is Mars. You do not want to pollute Mars, because if you pollute Mars with all kinds of human things, how do you differentiate the human things from the Martian things? And we really want to go to Mars to see if we can find signs of non-human life on Mars. And so I think environmental consciousness will be absolutely vital on Mars. On the moon is something that we need to be aware of, but it's going to be a tough argument to say we have to be absolutely pure on the moon if we are going to use the moon as a basis for an in-space economy. I mean, that's just going to be a tension that's out there. I just have to be honest about that. I'm not saying go pollute the moon, but I am saying that's a tension. So it's a fair question, and you should keep raising it.
I will.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to go on? Okay. So just real quickly, one of the programs that we have are we bring the moon and Mars into the classroom. We have these huge 35-foot moon and Mars maps that have various graphics to talk about the Mars map tends to talk more about space science-y kinds of things. The moon map talks about historical stuff. And we have curricula and rovers and globes that go along with these things. And as I said, we bring this into the classroom. One of the things I'm really, I think, most excited about is a program we're doing in Orange County, California, Orange County, Florida, where, as I mentioned before, we like to work in the districts. And what we've done is we've actually sponsored a student at University of Central Florida. And she has a graduate student working on her PhD, and she has a bunch of grad students working with her on this. And we've written curricula specific to a Earth and space science honors class in 7th grade. We've put this curricula into the classroom. We've done free surveys of the students and the teachers, and I think 10 or 12 classrooms, along with another 10 or 12 control groups that are sort of non-treatment samples. And so we'll evaluate through surveys. When the students are finished with this, it's 20 hours of curricula, and we'll get a real study. And what we're looking at is teacher and student self-efficacy on space science, basically. And so we will learn a lot about the effectiveness of space education in the classroom. We've done other things in previous years, but this is I think, the biggest study we've done, and it will be Christina's dissertation, and obviously peer-reviewed articles are going to come out of it and things like this. Really excited about it. And we think this is kind of a model for working with other districts. So we're working on putting these things together in some of the other large districts that we're in. But I think that's one of the things that we like to do that maybe is a little bit different. We're trying to make sure we know what kind of results we're getting out of the education we're putting into classrooms. So now I want to talk about this transition, what I think is the most significant paradigm shift in space today. And I'll call it the democratization of space. And so one of the things that's happening, not as fast as Sir Richard would like to see it, but people are flying into space, and that's something new and different. And Ron, you're flying on Blue sometime soon, we hope, soon enough. Soon, it'll never be soon enough, will it? I don't know if Ron is actually in our room, but at any rate, people are flying into space. And the significant thing is you've got 3 of the highest profile, 2 of the richest people in the world, and they have committed to space in a very big sort of way. And Elon, I really should have taken the time to pull a picture from yesterday's launch. And they're doing great things, and we talk a lot about this human spaceflight part of it. That's not what's important. The big thing that's happening in space right now is these massive satellite constellations. Now, Sir Richard has kind of backed out of OneWeb a little bit, but with Amazon and Kuiper, with Starlink, we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of satellites providing ubiquitous communication. And this is a big deal. This is a huge change in the way we're doing space. Second thing I want to bring up is as part of the democratization of space is the number of nations participating in space programs, in large part because they can build satellites at much lower cost. So the number of spacefaring nations has doubled in the last 5 years, come from 40 to about 80. And that's an incredible thing. I have students from the program I ran at Florida Tech who just came up to me, and he's like one of the top people in the African Union space program now. And he was my student 2 or 3 years ago. It's incredible. And so exciting things are going on. Space is accessible to nations that couldn't even think about it. So I mentioned this before. We have a program, Student Satellites in Space. We call it S-Cubed. And here's the thing. It's not, building a satellite is cool. Launching it may be even cooler. But here's the thing that we do. It's not just about building a satellite. You can build a satellite in a few months. I mean, CubeSats aren't all that sophisticated. But what we do is we build a 2-year curriculum around it. And so that students start by understanding space in general. What can you do in space? What kind of science? And so they start thinking about what kind of instruments they want to fly on their spacecraft. And then we get into the actual design. And now you're starting to look at some of the trade-offs that you have to make. I mean, they may want to put a hyperspectral imager on their satellite, on their CubeSat. The trouble is, that's going to cost $1 million, and you don't have $1 million in your budget. And so the process of learning how to run a sophisticated program with lots of other students, how to communicate this program, all of the soft skills may be more important than the engineering skills that they will learn in the process of building and flying a satellite. So at the end of the first year, they fly on a balloon. And to the second year, we try to get it. We'd like to get a, this is our first year we've done it. We'd like to line the launch up with the second year. That's usually harder than it looks. But in addition to just designing and building the spacecraft, they've got to go through all of the regulatory approval processes and things like that. I mean, we run the process, but we bring them along. So it's an incredibly rich educational experience. It is problem solving, project-based learning, as much as you could possibly include in it. So we think it's a great program. We're looking for ways to launch more satellites. We're submitting a proposal to try and get more satellite launches. And so we're really excited about this particular program. And it's all built around the concept of a CubeSat. For those, some of you are very familiar with CubeSats. That's literally the size of a Rubik's Cube. And it's got a lot of functionality to it. It actually has 3-axis stabilization. You can put instruments on it to do imaging. You can use it for a wide range of different kinds of experiments at I've said, a remarkably low cost. This is some pictures from kids that we've been working with in the UK, and they're building a chipsat. I do. It's a chipsat. It's literally this big, and you send them out by the hundreds. Now, we haven't gotten directly involved in it, and frankly, we haven't really sorted out how you manage hundreds of satellites, how you contain them, because a chipset looks very much like a piece of debris in space. There are ways of getting it down quickly, but these kinds of innovative things, literally in this case, each individual satellite is built by a single kid. And so I think I'll talk about this in a couple of charts. I did mention briefly summer camps that we do. And so we've got kids that are actually doing real things on Mars, building habitats on Mars, In this particular school, we actually built a regolith pit. It was in North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina, where all the dirt is red, so it all looks like Mars. That was cool. But the thing is, a lot of kids having a really great time, and that's a happy kid holding the rocket. So this is all part of camps we call rockets and rovers. I don't want to get into the details of that. I do want to talk about this project that we did, which is Project Janos. It was funded by NASA. What we did, this is mid-pandemic. And so Josh Bernstein, who's a phenomenal communicator, gets together with Scott Brzezinski, with various people to talk about problems in space. And the reason we call it Project Janos is we talk about problems that existed in the past, how they exist today, and how we're going to solve them in the future. And Josh goes out and talks to real people. We have real hardware there. It's a great communications tool. But the most important thing is, so Josh spends about 5 minutes or so. I think the longest tape might be 7-10 minutes. But then we've got about 2 hours, 3 hours in a lot of cases of real interesting lessons, none of which cost more than $20 to produce, that I provide, I think, really interesting educational experiences. So essentially, we've got these out to, it's available online today. They've gone out, I don't know, there's several thousand schools that have downloaded them. I wish we could get more and better data from some of these schools, but anyway, it's another project we've done. So the future. One of the things we really want to look at in the future, start bringing VR into the classroom, taking the amazing data that NASA is generating and starting to take kids through the solar system. Our solar system is an amazing place. You look at some of the moons of Jupiter, the moons of Saturn. I mean, it's an amazing place. There are really cool things. So in the future, we're looking to use some of these tools, the great data that NASA is producing, to provide incredible educational experiences that'll get kids excited about learning. It's not just about STEAM. And so it's not, as I've said several times, it is not just about STEAM or STEM. To me, it's kind of alphabet soup, but it's about English language arts. There are compelling stories in space. And what you want to get the kids to do is to read and talk about the stories. So we do work in that area. We do some work in social science. Actually, we're doing a project right now doing library arts and library sciences. And, you know, grubbing around for data can be kind of dull, but if you're looking around for space data, it seems like it's a lot more fun for kids. We're doing that in Clark County. Team building and leadership is absolutely part of things that we're doing with cubesats, and I think a lot of our lessons involve that. Communications is incredibly important to the foundation, to me, and I think everyone. Health sciences, data science, earth science, engineering, math, and of course, plumbing. And that's just to show the diversity of things that you can do with space. But on Mars, plumbing is really important. And it's a lot more interesting to study plumbing on Mars than it is on Earth. But if you think about Mars, it's kind of, it's a blank canvas for educators, because you can take any lesson from Earth and you can paint it on Mars and do incredible things. I'll give you one quick story where I still have a little bit of time, don't I? We donated maps to 9 schools in Cherokee County, South Carolina. I think it's about 85% minority population, 65% free and reduced school lunch. So it's a pretty impoverished, diverse school district. Put programs in 9 schools. We actually teamed with Clemson University, who put a grad student in, working with teachers, and we kind of let them come up with stuff. And what they came up with, I mean, we've got curriculum, but we let them run with this. What they came up with was truly incredible. They actually built a colonial trading system on Mars. This is 4th grade schools. Each one of the schools picked a spot on Mars and decided what they were going to do with that spot, search for life, water, whatever. And they built a trading regime. And that was incredibly cool. The cool thing was the improvement we measured against national science standards was about 50%. No, it's not, it wasn't really peer reviewable data and things like that, but the point is, we saw real improvement and we documented it. And so this stuff works. Projects in development. So I showed you the chipset thing. This is something that I really want to figure out how to do. And if somebody wants to work with me on it, we are wide open to it. But here's the idea. You've got these little satellites and you're sending them up. If you put them in CubeSats, you can send them up a few hundred at a time. They communicate with the mothership, if you will. They may not even leave the mothership. The point is, every kid can build a single satellite that is going to fly in space, that's going to gather data. And you can do trace gases. There are a variety of things you could do. But the point, what you're doing is, as you get tens of schools, hundreds, thousands of students participating, you're developing a data lake composed of data streams, which are satellites, which are built with kids. So every one of these data streams has a kid attached to it who can go and look at the data. That's my satellite, that's my data stream. And so now it's about data science. And so what we're doing is, I like to say, we're taking the bitter pill of data science and dumping it in the chocolate of space. But I think it has incredible potential, because you can extend this thing vertically, and then, let's say in middle school, simple tabulations on spreadsheets, but by the time you get into junior and senior years of high school, you can be doing pretty sophisticated regression analyses. It extends horizontally because it has beautiful network effects, because the more schools that are involved, the more kids that are involved, the bigger the data lake, the more value there is to the whole thing. And actually, we think you can connect the whole thing just using ham radios. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think this is kind of an example of some of the incredible things that we can do with space today to just, I don't say transform education, but really, it's time that we started using space for education rather than the other way around, which is kind of the way we tend to think about it. How do we get more people in STEM? Which is a good thing to do. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about my other job, which is I run a space operations program at Embry-Riddle University. We just started this program about 1.5 years ago. The basic target that we have is it's a graduate program. So we're taking people that already have an undergraduate degree. A lot of people are early to mid-career, want to make a transition in some cases from aviation or other industries into space, transition from doing sort of detailed engineering work, looking to get into a management position, transition into starting their own business. And it's online, asynchronous, which means anyone can take it anywhere, anytime. I'll tell you, it is really hard work putting it together, but I will also tell you that the quality of the work we get out of the students is just truly phenomenal. What we are doing is giving students the skills they need to be prosperous in the dynamic economy. Before we started this course, we actually went out and talked to people in industry and government, tried to find out, what are you looking for in graduate education? And the basic message that we've actually got a paper that's being submitted to journals based on the interviews and the analysis we did. We do a really great job of training engineers, training scientists, training people in business and management skills, in law and policy. But what we don't do is train these people in the industry that they live in. And so there was one really great quote that I got out of it from someone who will remain mercifully anonymous. And he said, look, I got 3,000 engineers working for me. And I make a lot of decisions that are not good engineering decisions. I need my staff, my engineers, my managers to understand why I'm making these decisions, because we all got to be on the same page. And I can't articulate those other sort of non-engineering reasons. They need to know about the economy that they live in. So that's the basic principle. I'll tell you, one of the interesting things that comes out of this, I was just looking at diversity. And the online program at Embry-Riddle, we're a somewhat smaller part of it. I'll get to that in just a second. Looks a lot like America, a lot more so than most universities, maybe all, let me just say most universities in America. The demographics are really pretty close. We would like to have more women, but I think if you look at ethnic groups, we're like within a couple percentage points in almost all cases. So that's a good thing, and I think part of it comes from online education. So I've mentioned integrated, interdisciplinary, comprehensive. We are really, really proud with what we've done. This needs to be updated because now this says greater than 500 students admitted in the first 3 semesters. We are now up to 720. Over the last month, we brought in 220 students. There's incredible interest here, and I think it reflects a passion for space and space education and interest in space education. But the whole thing works, and part of, this is not space cheerleading in this class. This is actually teaching you some of the hard lessons of space that I've learned. That we've got a whole bunch of adjuncts that teach in this program. And we say things like, if it doesn't make sense, it won't make dollars. And another one of my favorites is rocket fuel isn't kerosene, it's cash. And so we're teaching these students, and I want to start to say kids, these students, about what the space business really means. So the curriculum is set up so that there's a base curriculum, some core courses in markets, technology systems and cost, policy and law, program management. And then we've got what I call industry verticals. And so in each of these industry verticals, and I'm building out a couple of more right now, in each of these industry verticals, you will learn about the launch industry, the SATCOM industry, and you will do a project to come up with a business concept, but you don't get to talk to about your technology until you have already done market analysis. You know what the sources of value are, you know what the market looks like, you know what the whole industry looks like. Then you get to design your system, which is exactly the opposite of what we typically do in space. We come up with a great technical idea and say, somebody surely wants to buy this. Sometimes they do, but mostly they don't. And then there's a few cats and dogs. There are space systems electives that are not kind of gradually get replaced by things here. Longer term, we're actually going to do a technical track that sort of parallels this, looking at, instead of designing a business, you'll design a rocket. That's going to be a lot of fun. So that concludes what I've got here with the question, space is for everyone. Where is your place in space? And that's the foundation. And with that, I will come back to Zoom. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. That's a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And we'll obviously hold on for you to switch back cameras so that you're, there you go. Thank you so much for such a broad view of what the foundation is up to, and obviously what you're personally up to outside of that in the university. I think that was a really great deep dive into how you're creating, I think, which is a very important thing, sort of a future workforce that it's fun stuff to do in schools, but there's an end result which I think is clear. There's a through line through everything you shared, which is about it really is an opportunity to bring everyone along. So thank you so much for sharing such.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So I'll start off with a couple of questions. One of them is very interested in the CubeSat kind of things. And obviously seeing that in the classroom. Is that something that has made it to space yet?
No.
Okay.
No,
So,
we are just finishing our first year at Durango High School, Clark County. Clark County is a massive district. It is interestingly, it's also, we're running the program through the U.S. Space Force ROTC, Junior ROTC. We are finishing the first year. We'll be flying our balloons next month. I think we've got a date. Brian, who runs the program, has a date. So yeah, then we're building a full-scale satellite next year. We are scavenging for a launch right now as we speak.
That's very, very great context there. I think you may find that there's a bunch of teachers who are on in the sessions who do high altitude balloon launches. And the analog opportunity there, of course, is your CubeSat. It could just be hanging off the bottom of the balloon, and you essentially get to pretend it's in orbit. All of the data comes down, all of the,
So what we do in the first year is we actually build a flat sat, breadboard, whatever you want to call it. So it's functionally a satellite. And then we put it into an enclosure, which is sort of notionally like a satellite enclosure, but we're not going to restrict ourselves to the CubeSat format. So you're right, we could do all of those, and it doesn't really differ in a whole lot of ways from what's going on, other than we're doing all of this thing as stepping stones. And I think the important part of it is this program isn't about satellites, it's about education.
Yeah. So, and that I clearly, from everything you're saying there, very strong foundation to sort of build on that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's contact information on there somewhere. If not, Andy@aldrinfoundation.org. Send me a note. Oh, there's a familiar face. Here.
Andy, how you doing?
Fantastic.
Good. Hey, sorry, Liam, I couldn't find the raise hand button on my Zoom for some reason, but maybe since I'm on already, I can ask Andy a quick question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. So Andy, you said you just got back from symposium and I wasn't able to attend. So I was wondering if you could kind of give an update on what your thoughts were from this year's symposium, especially related to education or workforce development or whatever.
18,000 is a lot of people. More importantly, it's a lot of cars. Setting all of that aside for the moment. So we did the day we did on workforce development that the foundation put together, I thought was a really good step in the right direction. So we had panels on education, which I was fortunate to be on policy and industry. I think it got a great group of people together and it started a good conversation about, I think there are two threads, and the thread that's common always is how do we get space needs more STEM? And I got that, right? And then that's been pounded into our heads for years, decades. I would almost turn on its head. STEM needs more space, and space needs a lot more than STEM. And so we're starting to creep into those discussions. I think for the White House and I forgot Quincy,
Dr. Quincy, yeah.
Well,
the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy.
No, she's not the head of the. She is now
Oh, she is.
on the Space Council, and she is Chirac's deputy for space. And so she very clearly is pushing the notion of let's talk about what space can do for education, and so that I think is a really positive thing.
Great, thanks.
Very good. I have one question that I promised I would put here. It's actually from Ben Stanley. Oh yes, I see someone.
Ben Stanley?
There we go.
I'm not answering.
So there you go.
Now, just a fair disclosure, Ben is a former student of mine and one of my rock star students.
Awesome. Come off mute, Ben, and you're welcome to ask your question directly.
Hey, Andy. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ben.
So my question for you was, outside of transportation and logistics, what do you think is the most promising value proposition or business case for lunar settlement?
Business case for what?
For lunar settlement.
Oh.
Because we talked about the propellant production and all that, right?
Yeah.
But this is kind of like a supporting.
So did you
the
throw
reason
in
we
the-
want propellant is because we want to go to the moon and go to other places or whatever. But something that's like moon specific, where the demand terminals end there. What's the
That is
What do you
not
think is the most
specific, 'cause
promising?
I actually think, I think there are, because the moon is well populated by meteorites, a lot of, if not everything that you need on the Earth can be found somewhere on the moon. I think what's valuable beyond water are going to be all of those resources, which are going to be harder to get at. But so the other thing, which is probably never a big market, is tourism, because it's never going to be cheap to fly to the moon, never. But there are a couple of things that I've kind of hit on. The moon is the most incredible tourist destination. Nothing against Venus, Guillermo, but the moon is the most incredible tourist destination, I think, in the universe. And I have read all of the Hitchhiker's Guide many times. But think about a couple of things. Think about a habitat at the edge of a crater, which is sitting on one of the poles. On one side of that crater, you have a view of the Earth all the time, right? On the other side of that crater, if you're in a permanently shaded region, you have an incredibly black sky. And so you have perhaps the best view of stars in the solar system, maybe not in the solar system, but it's pretty damn good. So that's one of the things that's cool. The other thing that's even cooler, we always talk about sports on lunar habitats, and everyone wants to dunk. And even with 1/6 gravity, I don't think I can dunk. However, think about a high dive. Think about a 10-meter platform into water, and you are accelerating down at 1/6 the acceleration. What a cool thing. And there are other cool things. The point is that there is some massive tourism value there. How many people can afford it? It'll be trivial. Yeah, but Ben, I want to be clear. I think the real value of the moon is going to be supporting in-space economic development. It may be that you actually produce stuff on the moon, and because you don't have to do, you don't have to worry about fairings and things like that, it's a whole lot easier to launch it off of the moon. I think Elizabeth certainly does have her hand up.
Go ahead, Elizabeth. Unmute and
Yeah.
ask away.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to take us a little bit away from the high dives. That's more fun. But actually, I've got to go meet at a school who's interested in more space education around the corner from me. So I'd like to get as much information as possible. But my question was, how do you choose the school districts that you're going to work with? Obviously, the one that's near Space Force, that's kind of a no-brainer. But what about outside? I'm near Washington, D.C. We need space policy too. So
Space policy. But so I'll be honest with you, it's, this is like, there's a little bit of serendipity. So I talk a lot to people. And more often than not, the districts find me.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we don't, sometimes we target districts, and chances that they're really interested in it. There are plenty of superintendents who are really interested and fascinated with space.
Okay.
But they're superintendents who have the hardest job in the United States right now. They are under such pressures, and there is such total stupidity going on from all sides. It's just, it's incredible what they go through. But when they catch on to space and go, this is the shiny thing I want to do, then we bring their curriculum directors, their STEM directors in, and we build programs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And maybe a related question from one of the participants. This is from a teacher, Megan Tucker. Will the Aldrin Foundation offer educator grants again for the Mars map?
Yeah, we will. We've been talking about that. With COVID, we all kind of hunkered down a little bit. But yeah, in fact, that just came up at one of our meetings It's come up for the, Jim Christensen keeps pushing it. So anybody who knows Jim knows he's relentless and he will continue to push this. So the answer is yes, we will be doing that. You know, back to Elizabeth really quick. We have some people that are kind of wandering around Washington. I'd love to find things to do there. We have a map in with the Smithsonian, but I would really like to find a way of kind of getting into a school district there. We can do more than just like one school. So
Well,
if you have any ideas, I'm wide open.
Yeah, we actually in Montgomery County, we have a school that's the Parkland Magnet Middle School for Aerospace Technology.
Wow.
Is one.
Let's go build a satellite there.
Yeah, and yes, and then the school around the corner from me is just a STEM magnet school, but the teachers there are really excited about space. So again, it's like you might have a magnet school, but they're interested more in biology as opposed to space. So you got to find the magnet school that has it.
Nothing wrong with biology. We just do space.
No, I know. But
So
I'm just
send me a note and let's talk more.
okay. Great, thanks.
And another hands up from Athanasius, I think.
Yes, that's it. Excuse me, but I do not know which luck brought me here, but I could not leave from this call without saying hello to Professor Aldrin. Yes, it would be crazy if I didn't be able to go to my family and friends and the students and say that I had this honor. Yes.
I was just
Hello.
born, man.
Sorry?
I was just born into it.
Yes, it's unbelievable. Yes.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's an aspect of that says, hey, you were born into it, and now what's there is that we're all born into what comes next.
Yeah.
And I've just got to acknowledge you for being someone who is taking on making sure it's accessible and available to all. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I get from your presentation is just that there's a clear and very present role that you've taken on to bring that forward. However, it was for you growing up. There's a way that you have taken on, and you are the one who's in charge of how you are representing that going forward. So thank you so much.
You all need to know that this was not my original plan. I began life as a Sovietologist, and then the Soviet Union went away, so I was out of a job.
Who knew that there was a Sovietologist was a thing? That's the first time
I wrote my dissertation on how the Soviet Union beat the United States into space. The fascinating part of it is it was all about entrepreneurship. Which is not where you'd expect to see that.
No, in fact, and Elizabeth, her origin story, I think, if I may say this, came about because of Sputnik, right?
Oh,
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, my mom got inspired by it, wanted to learn Russian, made me learn Russian, took me to the Soviet Union when I was 15 and blah, blah, blah. And then I majored in Soviet studies. But anyway.
Did you really? Congratulations. Now what do you do? It's great history.
We'll have coffee.
Right, certainly not vodka. I don't need that anymore. I have, yeah, we can swap stories. I spent a lot of time there, and I was just literally, when I was at the RAND, because I was at the RAND Corporation, so I had sort of a relatively unlimited research budget, but I'd get dropped off and I wouldn't see anybody that spoke English for weeks. But I've like purged my brain of all my Russian at this point.
So that we're coming up to, we've got 4 minutes left. Formally, that there is another question that just popped into the chat from Ryan about while the Soviet angle is gone, what are your feelings about the US-China competition and division for the moon, along with ITAR, etc.? So,
well, ITAR is the easy one. That's we'll just never get over it, and it'll always be dumb. Okay. So, US-China. That's going to be, and the moon, that is going to be interesting. So, I mean, here's the deal. We will be in a competition between the US led coalition, if you will, and the Chinese led coalition for lunar real estate. And the thing about the moon is, I grew up in California, so I think when I think about real estate, I think in California terms. There's these tiny little bits of Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica, whatever you want to call it, San Francisco, parts of San Francisco that are incredibly valuable real estate. The stuff that's sitting on the edge of craters where you want to have your restaurant at the end of the universe, that kind of thing. But there's not very much. I mean, I haven't really seen a good quantification, but if you said it was 1% of the moon, I would say that's way high. And so those bits are valuable, and getting there is going to be really important. And here's the other really interesting thing is, so we've learned that the ejecta from when you land on the moon or leave sends rocks and shrapnel and all kinds of stuff for hundreds of kilometers. Maybe, I mean, a lot of it evidently may even go orbital, but it creates a really dangerous region around where anybody lands. What that means is, irrespective, well, I'll get to the international law in just a second. What it means is you will have de facto keep out zones, that if you land there and you're habitating that area, nobody else gets to come in unless they clear it with you. And there will be ways of working this, but it's just going to create de facto keep out zones, which means that every land claim for your gold rush is going to be a really big land claim, which only increases the competitive pressure. And so the competition is real, and it's going to happen maybe sooner than we thought. And there will be a lot of interest. I mean, the agency is, not the agency, the DoD is getting really interested in this for a reason. And that's the reason that it is a strategic high ground. And I'm not that, I mean, we will create international law around the realities of what's going to happen on the surface of the moon. And I think, I think international law should follow explorers, not precede them. And so there's a wonderful metaphor of Virginia Tech University. I don't know if the story is apocryphal, but I love it. Virginia Tech built their buildings, and they did not build sidewalks. They said, let's figure out where people walk, and then we'll build the sidewalks. And I think that's what we need to do in the moon.
That's a great perspective and thought-provoking ideas there on the impact of lunar, we'll call it colonization.
Habitation.
Habitation. There we go.
At the risk of, no, I'm not going to call it industrialization. I'll call it lunar development. This is a real thing. But the good news is it's going to encourage us to go to the moon quickly and go there to stay and go there to do, well, I hope it encourages us to go there and do good things. Because if you're the US government, what you want to do is plant as many habitats as you can. What you would really like to do is encourage commercial investment and development of those habitats, because the government can't afford it. And so the best way for the US to improve its strategic position on the moon will be by encouraging commerce. At least in theory.
Very, very cool. So we are at the bottom of the hour. So, and I think, Mark, is everyone going to go back to the main room?
Yeah, we have a little bit of a break now, so it may be time zone dependent for you. It's lunchtime here. It might be an afternoon snack back east. It's certainly dinner time or later in the UK and Europe. So depending where you are, we have a little bit of a break before session 3, but be sure to come back for session 3. We've got some really great folks. Britt Duffy Atkins from Celestial Citizen is back. Igor is presenting in this room about space education in Croatia. Gitika's got her session for young professionals. And we have our first of our 2 Venus sessions. I don't think that's yours, Guillermo, but Rose got his. So come on back in about an hour from right now, but you do have a chance to get up from your screen, move around, go look at something green or far away outside, and we'll see everybody back in an hour for the last two sessions and the capstone with Frank White and Rick Tumlinson promises to be.
That'll be interesting.
That'll be iconoclastic, I think.
So Mark, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, Andy, this was great. And I'm glad that the multitasking was kind to me and I got to sit in on most of it and pay attention. So it was
Awesome.
fantastic.
Me too. Okay.
For your story.
So long, everybody.
Bye now.